marker denoting Lystra. If you can see, L, V, S, T, R, A. This may be a Y. So Lystra, Lystra. It's either L-U or L-V, Lystra. And next slide will show us where this was found. On this hill here, notice that we're up above the plains area. See the rock there in the foreground? Notice the lines carving that rock? That was part of the building at one point. But this is Timothy's hometown. Timothy is going to be the main focus of our discussion today. Timothy comes from Lystra. Lystra was a very Christian city all the way up until the 1300s. They sent representatives to different councils, the Council of Nicaea, Constantinople, Chalcedon in 325, 381, 3, and 451. So this is a very strong Christian center in Lystra. And Timothy was one of the youngest leaders in the church. We're going to find out a little bit more about Timothy, but we go to the next slide. We're going to step off the hill, turn around, and this is what we see. This is the city, or the tell, which you all know what a tell is now. So if I ask next week what a tell is, everybody should be able to say a layer upon layer of city built upon itself. And when they excavate, they're able to tell the ages of the cities by going down and seeing, what building style, what pottery style, and they can tell when things happened in that city, including wars, including famines, including all sorts of things. So let's go to our next slide. So let's look at our passage now. Chapter 16, the second half of verse 1. The first half of verse 1 says that Paul and Silas went to Derbe and Lystra. There was a disciple named Timothy. That's Lystra. Timothy was in Lystra. The son of a Jewish woman who was a believer, but his father was a Greek. He was well spoken of by the believers in Lystra and Iconium. Paul wanted Timothy to accompany him, and he took him and had him circumcised because of the Jews who were in those places, for they all knew that his father was a Greek. Let's find out a little more about Timothy. The Bible tells us a whole lot about Timothy. Some of the people that we talk about in the Bible, we don't know too much. But Timothy, we can learn a lot about. Next slide. He was on the second missionary journey, obviously. Paul picks him up at this point and takes him with him. His mother and his grandmother, who were they? Lois and Eunice. And Paul says that both of them were very faithful, that they handed down their faith to Timothy. So he's a third-generation Christian. He was Paul's messenger, representative. He was with Paul in Rome as Paul was a prisoner preparing to be executed. He was also a prisoner, but not killed. Paul calls him his beloved son in 1 Corinthians. Paul says that of all people I know, Timothy has the most similar mind that I do. He has his mindset and mine. We see eye to eye on almost everything. Timothy is associated with the writing of at least 5 of Paul's letters. And Paul probably saw Timothy as the next person to take over for him when he was done his ministry. When he was executed in Rome, he saw Timothy as the one who would take over for him after that. But there's a problem. There's a problem with our story. Did anybody pick up on what Paul did to Timothy prior to going out and ministering to the other people? Why is that a problem? We just spent an entire chapter, 5 weeks, looking at one chapter in which the entire thing was to say, we don't need to be circumcised to be saved. We don't need to be circumcised to be Christians. And now, what does Paul do? He says, come on, Timothy, come and minister with me. But first, let's get you circumcised. And it seems at first to be a conflict. Like, Paul, make up your mind. What are we doing here? But as we look into it a little bit more, what we're going to see is that Timothy was the son of a Jew. Halfway. His father was Greek. His mother was a Jew. So he was half Jewish. But for the Jews, that wasn't good enough for the most part. In fact, if a Jew married a Gentile and had a child, the child was seen as dead in the Jewish culture. In the Jewish society of that area, they said that child doesn't exist. For us, that child is dead. They are a Gentile. In fact, this was so prevalent, this idea was so prevalent, that they would even have funerals for those children born to those mixed marriages. You say, well, why are they so hard? What's so bad about them? Well, think about the religion. Jews worship the one and only true and living God. Who do the Greeks worship? Zeus, Hermes, right? Athena. They sacrifice to idols. So a Jewish child or a half-Jewish child born to a Gentile parent would probably be worshiping a false god. And so in the Jewish mind, they're as good as dead. If they're not worshiping the true and living God, they don't have eternal life. And so they're dead. And so the Jews, for the most part, would reject half-breeds, if you want to call them that, a mixed marriage child. But Paul, what does Paul do? Paul says, no. No. Not only is he alive, but he is a true worshiper of the true and living God. So why does he need to get circumcised? What's the point? Could you imagine if somebody wanted to go and work with Jewish people and they had a tattoo on their forehead that was a swastika? How well would that work? Probably not very well. For the Jews, an uncircumcised male was basically an outsider, an anti-Jew. It was somebody who rejected the Jewish religion in their minds. And so for Timothy to be circumcised, it wasn't a matter of salvation to Paul. Paul has already argued, and will continue to argue through all his letters, that circumcision has nothing to do with salvation. Timothy's circumcision had everything to do with the ministry that he was going to be doing. Every time that Paul says we go to a new place, we witness first to the Jew, then to the Gentile. And so if Timothy was going to witness to Jews, he had to be circumcised, because they would say, are you a Jew? Are you a follower of the one and true living God? And he would say, yes, I am. And they say, why are you not circumcised? And so for him, it would be an impediment to the ministry. Nothing to do with salvation. Had everything to do with his ability to reach out to other Jews. In fact, there's another point in Paul's ministry when he's working with a man named Titus. Now, Titus is a full-blooded Gentile. And people want Titus to get circumcised, and Paul refuses to allow Titus to be circumcised, and Titus doesn't want to get circumcised. And so, in that instance, because he's a full-blooded Gentile, he has no interest in circumcision. Paul says there's no reason for him to be circumcised. He's a Gentile, and he's a follower of Christ. But with Timothy, he wanted to claim his Jewish heritage. And because he wanted to claim that to work with the Jews more closely, he had to be circumcised. So it had everything to do with his effectiveness in ministry, nothing to do with his salvation. So let's go on to the next part of the passage.